Just 1 minute ago, Britain was thrown into total shock. A message from Buckingham Palace spread like wildfire, shaking every corner of the country. For the first time in modern history, the King himself has stepped into the political battlefield. And what he reportedly demanded from Prime Minister Keir Starmer has left the entire nation erupting in disbelief. No one expected the monarch to move. No one imagined the palace would act. And yet, in a stunning twist that feels almost impossible, the King's sudden intervention has pushed the government into what many are now calling an unavoidable snap election. What happened behind those closed doors is sending tremors across Britain. Inside Whitehall, the atmosphere was already tense long before the palace's message arrived. Rumours had been circulating for days. Whispers of internal chaos, hidden disagreements and quiet panic settling across the government. Ministers were seen entering Downing Street with expressionless faces, avoiding cameras, refusing to answer even the simplest questions. Something felt off. Something felt heavy, and yet nothing compared to what exploded just moments ago. According to senior insiders, a private meeting between King Charles and Prime Minister Keir Starmer took place earlier this morning. At first, many believed it was a routine briefing, a simple exchange, a ceremonial catch-up, but it was anything but routine. The tone of the meeting, described by one source as unusually direct, reportedly left Starmer stunned. The King, normally known for keeping a careful distance from politics, expressed what palace officials called deep national concern over the current direction of the government. The rising public unrest and the growing mistrust spreading across the country like wildfire. The news hit the political world like a lightning strike. No one expected the monarch to voice such strong feelings, even privately. And while the palace has not confirmed the exact wording, insiders claim the King told Starmer that the country needed clarity, stability, and a renewed democratic mandate. Those words alone were enough to ignite speculation, but what followed was even more shocking. Within minutes of the meeting ending, reports began circulating that Starmer had been urged, firmly, to consider calling an immediate snap election in order to restore confidence. Britain reacted instantly, phones lit up, newsrooms went chaotic, social media exploded. Was this real? Was this happening? Could the King actually push a sitting Prime Minister into an early election? Commentators pointed out that while the monarch cannot directly force an election, the sheer weight of such a message, the symbolic pressure, is unprecedented. Coming from the Crown, even a suggestion carries the force of history itself. And for a government already rattled by internal fractures, it was enough to cause a full-scale political meltdown. By midday, the country was buzzing with conflicting leaks. Some claimed Starmer looked visibly shaken as he left the palace. Others reported that senior ministers were locked in emergency conversations, unsure how to respond to the unexpected royal pressure. And outside Downing Street, crowds began to gather, holding signs, chanting slogans and demanding answers. Some cheered the King's intervention, calling it a necessary wake-up call. Others condemned it, accusing the palace of overstepping tradition. But one thing was clear. The nation had entered uncharted territory. Inside Parliament, the shock was even greater. Opposition MPs erupted with laughter, disbelief and fierce accusations. Government MPs whispered nervously among themselves, trying to understand what this meant for their future. And in the middle of this chaos, Starmer himself remained silent. No public statement, no press briefing, no explanation, just a tense, growing silence that made everything even more dramatic. But behind that silence, pressure was building like a ticking bomb. The British people wanted clarity, journalists wanted answers, MPs wanted direction, and the palace, unusually firm, had made its feelings clear in a way that could not be ignored. For the first time in decades, a Prime Minister found himself not only battling political opponents, not only battling public anger, but also facing the subtle, immovable weight of the Crown's expectations. And this is where the story takes an even darker turn, because insiders suggest Starmer now faces a decision that could change the future of Britain in ways no one saw coming. As the hours passed, the tension around Westminster thickened like a storm ready to break. British politics has seen scandals, resignations, rebellions, but nothing compared to the shockwave triggered by the King's sudden intervention. Even veteran journalists, people who had covered politics for decades, admitted they had never witnessed anything quite like this. The air felt charged. Every conversation felt dangerous. Every step inside Parliament echoed with fear, curiosity, and the sense that something irreversible was unfolding behind closed doors. In Downing Street, the pressure on Starmer began to intensify. Advisors rushed between rooms, carrying stacks of documents, whispering updates and warning the Prime Minister that the situation was spiralling faster than anyone expected. Polls were shifting by the minute. Public opinion was splitting in half. Some saw the King's message as a necessary reminder that national unity mattered more than political games. Others saw it as a shocking disruption of tradition, but everyone agreed. Starmer's silence was making things worse. Inside the cabinet room, the atmosphere was almost suffocating. Ministers demanded answers. What exactly did the King say? One asked. Is this true? Is this real? Another pushed. Starmer kept his eyes on the table, refusing to reveal the details of the meeting, but his uncomfortable posture told them everything they needed to know. The monarch's words had rattled him, and the cabinet could feel it. The cracks inside the government began to widen. Some ministers argued that the only way to regain control was to stand firm, reject the pressure, ignore the chatter, and push forward with existing plans. Others insisted that trying to defy a message from the Crown, even a symbolic one, would be political suicide. They warned Starmer that public trust was already slipping, and if he appeared to ignore the King, that trust might collapse entirely. Meanwhile, outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, the crowds kept growing. What began as a handful of curious observers had transformed into a massive gathering. Protesters, royal supporters, students, political activists, all shouting, singing, arguing, filming. Everyone wanted a statement. Everyone wanted a sign. And with every minute of silence from both the palace and Downing Street, the rumours became more dramatic, more chaotic, and more uncontrollable. By early evening, the story had spread beyond Britain's borders. International broadcasters interrupted regular programming with breaking updates. Foreign governments requested briefings, allies demanded clarity, even global markets reacted, dipping nervously as investors tried to understand whether Britain was heading toward political instability or a democratic reset. For a moment, it felt like the entire world was watching London, waiting for its next move. Inside number 10, Starmer finally retreated to his office, shutting the door behind him. Some insiders later described him as a man cornered by history. The room was dim, quiet, and filled with the weight of decisions that could define his entire legacy. On his desk, reports spread out like a battlefield. Collapsing confidence, collapsing support, collapsing patience. He knew the cabinet was demanding direction, the country was demanding leadership, and the palace, with one private conversation, had created a pressure he could no longer escape. The whispers in Parliament grew louder. Opposition parties smelled blood in the water. Some MPs speculated that Starmer would resign to avoid the humiliation of being forced into an election. Others predicted he would attempt to fight back, address the nation, reject the rumours, and challenge the interpretation of the King's message. But none of these predictions matched what happened next, because while Starmer struggled behind closed doors, a new wave of leaks began to spread. Anonymous insiders claimed the King had expressed exceptional concern that the government was losing its grip on national unity. Another leak claimed that the monarch urged the Prime Minister to face the public with honesty and renew legitimacy. Whether these leaks were accurate or exaggerated didn't matter. The public believed them, and belief was enough to set the country on fire. By nightfall, Westminster was practically vibrating with tension. MPs stayed late in their offices, waiting for any sign of movement. Journalists camped outside Downing Street, their cameras fixed on the black door, hoping for a sudden midnight announcement. And behind that door, Starmer's closest advisors told him the simple, brutal truth. The situation was now beyond politics, beyond strategy, beyond damage control. Prime Minister, one advisor whispered, Britain expects a choice. You cannot hide from this. Not tonight. And in that moment, Starmer realised something he had been hoping to avoid. Whatever the king had intended, whatever the palace believed, whatever the public imagined, the storm had already formed. The pressure was too great, the silence was too long, and the country was demanding an answer he could no longer delay. What he did next would shock the entire nation. Starmer stood alone at the window of his office, staring out at the dark streets of London. The city lights flickered like distant signals, each one representing millions of people waiting, watching, judging. He knew that every second he hesitated, the pressure grew heavier. The king's message had set the country in motion, and now Britain was holding its breath. His advisers waited outside, afraid to interrupt the silence that had consumed the Prime Minister. Everyone knew that the decision he was about to make would reshape the nation and possibly end his political career in one night. Inside Parliament, the atmosphere was no calmer. The chamber, usually filled with noise and arrogance, now felt tense and uncertain. MPs paced the halls with restless energy, trading rumours like currency. Some predicted a national broadcast within the hour. Others whispered that Starmer was preparing to resist the pressure and accuse the palace of overstepping its constitutional boundaries. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that the thoughts running through the Prime Minister's mind as he weighed loyalty, pride, fear, and the looming shadow of a royal intervention. Outside Downing Street, the crowd had doubled. News vans lined the road, their floodlights turning night into artificial daylight. Reporters spoke rapidly into microphones, speculating on every possible outcome. Some claimed Starmer had been cornered. Others suggested he had been quietly negotiating with palace advisers to soften the blow. Every new rumour only added more fuel to the fire. Britain was no longer just watching. It was erupting with theories, with outrage, with anticipation. Inside his office, Starmer finally turned away from the window. He walked toward his desk, hands trembling slightly. On the desk sat a single sheet of paper. A draft of a speech he had not yet committed to. The title at the top read, "Address to the Nation." He stared at it for a long moment, knowing that reading those words aloud would trigger a chain reaction no one could reverse. But as he sat down, he realised he had no more time, no more room to hide. The country needed an answer. When he stepped into the small studio room inside Downing Street, even his closest advisers held their breath. Cameras were positioned, microphones adjusted. A hush fell over the entire building. And as Starmer took his seat, the red light on the camera blinked. Live. Broadcasting to millions. The moment his face appeared on screens across Britain, the noise outside fell into silence. Living rooms, pubs, offices. Everyone froze. Even the crowd in front of Downing Street went quiet, as if the entire country understood that this moment would define the night. In a steady voice that barely hid his exhaustion, Starmer began to speak. He acknowledged the tension across the country. He mentioned the meeting with King Charles, calling it frank and sincere. He admitted that Britain faced a crossroads, a moment of uncertainty that required, in his words, renewed trust between government and people. And then, in a stunning twist that sent shockwaves across the nation, he delivered the sentence everyone had feared and hoped for at the same time. "I have informed His Majesty the King," Starmer said slowly, "that the government will move forward with a snap general election." The reaction was immediate. Gasps erupted across Parliament. Some MPs shouted in disbelief. Others cheered wildly. Opposition benches roared with triumph. Government ministers stared at the screens, mouths open, their futures suddenly tossed into chaos. Outside, the crowd exploded into noise. Cheers, screams, chants, arguments. Britain had officially entered election mode. Starmer continued speaking, attempting to frame the decision as an act of leadership rather than surrender. He insisted the election would restore unity, stability, and democratic confidence. But everyone watching knew the truth. This was not a strategic choice. This was not part of a plan. This was a reaction to the immense weight of the King's intervention, a pressure too heavy for any Prime Minister to resist. Within minutes, social media erupted in absolute frenzy. Memes, theories, celebrations, outrage. The entire digital world shook. Commentators rushed to studios, analysts wrote rapid-fire breakdowns, even foreign governments issued statements expressing interest and concern. For the first time in decades, a UK election had not been triggered by party strategy, by parliamentary collapse, or by national crisis alone, but by the subtle, powerful influence of the Crown. In Buckingham Palace, the King reportedly watched the announcement with a calm expression. Officials insisted he had merely advised, not commanded. But the timing, the pressure, and the explosive public response told a different story, one that would be debated for generations. As Starmer finished speaking, the camera lights switched off. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of his decision settling over him like a cold shadow. The room remained silent, not a word, not a breath. Because everyone knew the next chapter had just begun. And Britain was about to enter one of the most unpredictable elections in modern history.